one of my favourite words is fascinating, with whatever said, which is a bit like interesting, because, as you say, a lot of people you go for help, they're picking people off the rough road and putting them on the smooth, which is not solving the problem at all. And part of my metaphor is the rear view mirror is small for a reason. If you keep looking back at what you did, then you're going to crash. And that's what so many people do when they're coaching someone. Well, let's go back to the problem and let's see. Sometimes you just need to learn to look out that front windscreen. And it's big for a reason, because that's where we should be going. I mean, it doesn't mean ignore the rear view mirror. It's there to glance at and learn from, but not to focus on.
How do you get 10,000 people to take a step to the left? What's behind the relentless mindset of a world champion? Why do teams of exceptional talent fail? How do you manage the pressure to perform? These are just some of the curious questions we will attempt to answer as we bring you world leaders, curious minds, exceptional talent, successful CEOs, and incredible human beings who know how to inspire great leaders and are inspiring great leaders themselves. I am Craig Johns, high performance leadership expert, international speaker, and CEO of Speakers Institute Corporate and World Sport Coach. This is the Inspiring Great Leaders podcast, where the ordinary don't belong. Welcome to the Inspiring Great Leaders podcast. Our guest today is the founder of Emotional Resilience, passionate researcher, and the author of the recently released book, It's in Your Hands. Her education includes a bachelor's degree in elementary education and teaching, master's degree in education learning management from Central Queensland University, and a Ph.D. in health promotion education from the University of the Sunshine Coast. Our guest's work helps shift humanity from a pervasive culture of blame, criticism, and judgment to a culture focused on improving our psychological well-being, life satisfaction, and resilience. I have the privilege of introducing you to a global 4-decade teacher and educator who is trained in Chinese medicine, Shiatsu, and yoga, and loves helping people avoid the bumps in the road by regaining control of the emotional steering wheel. Dr. Jane Foster. Jane, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We were having a bit of a chat offline before we started about how your children grew up, but I'm really curious, where did you grow up and what was the big dream?
Okay, I grew up in Blackrock in Melbourne, and I think my big dream came about when I started outdoor education at school. We used to go out for weekends, and then when I left school, I studied outdoor education, and I can remember being on a rock face with a boy who was a multi-offender. He was a bully. I was belaying him on the rock face, and he came up and froze about 3/4 of the way and was crying and didn't want to go. And I talked him through, and he came up, and it was the look in his eyes when he got to the top that changed everything for me, because for the first time he'd achieved something from within rather than having to break into a car or steal something or do something from the outside. And I think that's what steered me into wanting everyone to be able to take control of their own steering wheel from within.
Fascinating insight. I think based on, if I caught this right, we do things, we create behaviors based on an external acceptance or what we feel might be perceived as acceptance, versus kind of drawing in deep to who we are and being able to draw out what is I suppose what is best in us. Did I catch that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And and it is drawing on those energies and strengths that you have within you. And that's when you start to get that real self-confidence and self-esteem, because you're doing what feels right.
And that's a real challenge, for young people. We're always trying to feel accepted in this world. I suppose even as adults, we're trying to find our place of acceptance, whether that be in family or relationships or in a company or in society or at school if you're younger. And it's, rather than actually just realizing you have all these amazing internal, genes or talents and gifts and just trying to believe in believing in yourself in a way. It's a fascinating way we start our time on this planet.
It is. And I think, education has a great role to play in that, because it really compartmentalizes intelligence. I can remember my youngest son is dyslexic, and we were at a camp. We were just camping with a friend of his who was very intelligent. And I overheard them at the campfire. And he said to Sam, "Oh, the new kid, he's even dumber than you are." And I thought, So I went up to him and I said, "What do you class as intelligence?" And he said, "Well, getting A's, doing, and this is what education does." And I said, "Look, this is the continuum of intelligence. It's really long. And school intelligence is just about 1 centimetre of that long length. And, there's emotional, there's all sorts of different intelligences. And I think a lot of people who don't fit into the education system believe they're less than, because they don't get a chance to see what their strengths are and the way they learn, because we all learn differently."
Yeah, I think when I was back in school, there was kind of school smarts and street smarts, and that school smart was very much based on, did you get an A or a B or a C or a D? And it was very narrow focus. And I think, that importance now of where we're really starting to expand that out into, really what does intelligence mean?
Yeah.
And, I think of even IQ. What place does IQ still have? Is there a place for it, or do we actually need something else that can start to explain who we are? And is it even appropriate? Do we need something like IQ?
Exactly.
It's a big question.
Well, now with businesses and the big corporations, they're looking for EQ, not IQ. They want that emotional intelligence in their leaders, but also in their employees.
I was just talking to a very good friend of mine who has worked with some of the best sports teams on the planet, so I won't name them. I don't think that's appropriate for this. And we were talking a lot about that still at a professional sports level, for instance, they're still hard on their technical skills and not so much on how, as a collective, their emotional energy or how they fit together for that team. And it's still a lot of potluck of whether that team or that management team gels together and whether they actually are the right fit for the athletes of the team. And so it's a lot based on that technical side of things. And we still see that a little bit in corporate, but we have seen a huge shift in the last, decade, but more so, I suppose, in the last 3 to 4 years, where we're starting to see that shift on thinking about, okay, what skills do we really need in this organization? Yes, we're going to need technical skills for specific areas, but what other skills do we need in those people so that we can develop well as a culture, develop well in the way that we make decisions, and I suppose the creativity that's required to push to the next level and be relevant as an organization.
It was interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine, a psychologist, and about the different attributes that we've always had for leaders, how they need to be detached and, focused and have high levels of stress, be able to cope with that. And I listed a whole different list of things. And she said, "Do you realize you've just listed the attributes of a psychopath?" I said, interesting, whereas now bringing in a lot of these EQ focused qualities softens that, humanitizes it, but also allows a leader to be human. Because at the moment, there's almost, you walk in the door in the office and you're supposed to leave all your problems that you've got at home behind. But you're a human. How do you do that? So people are being self-confident and all sorts of things at work. And at home, it's totally different.
It's a really interesting balance, though, because you're asked to be vulnerable, but we all know the power of positive psychology.
Yep.
Where there are times when it's appropriate, like we have to think about the responsibility we have and, is it actually appropriate to be transparent in that moment every single time? And it's a very fine balance. And so, yes, there are times where it is good to share or we need a release as a leader. But there are other times where, you have to make that decision and go, is it appropriate right now? Because it can be more damaging.
Absolutely.
Depending on what the environment is at that time.
And that's why it's called selective vulnerability. It's actually a thing that is the balance between oversharing and undersharing. So it becomes, in the middle, as you said, you share when it's appropriate. Because as a leader, you have certain expectations from your team.
Mm.
Yeah. And I suppose that's why I created the language that I did, to try and guide people through that selective vulnerability.
Oh.
So people can admit how they feel, but in an objective way that doesn't make you vulnerable or weak, which is what a lot of people see.
Yeah. So emotional intelligence, the actual term and, the work that's done behind it's been around for quite a long time, but like most things in life, it takes a long time before it comes to fruition. Think about artificial intelligence. It's been around for over 60 years, but it took until 2023 to really become a term that it was common in our vernacular. And now it seems like every sentence has the word AI in it. And it's somewhat the same with emotional intelligence. So if I remember correctly, I think 2012 was when you really made that choice to go full-time into the space of emotional resilience and looking at how do you bring emotional intelligence and resilience together. I know I was working in Phuket at the time at an amazing facility there, and the international school was kind of like a world leader in emotional social learning. And it was still very much this, what is that? How do you do that? Is that a little bit woo-woo? And so for you, what was that choice to really kickstart or to make that big introduction to that space and really go for it?
Okay, I think it was because of my experience as a teacher with secondary students. I was finding a lot of them were fine on the outside, but they weren't on the inside. And it was the same with teachers and parents, and this false thing where we have to be happy all the time, or, and we need to be in control. And I wanted to bring in, and being a teacher, you see so many programs come and go, and so many of them are quick fixes. And I wanted to create something that you could incorporate into your everyday life that was a long-term solution. And it can be for 18 months old right through to 100 years old. Because what I'm really trying to do is create cultural change. Because at the moment, negative emotions are seen as bad. And everyone's picking people off those emotional roads and putting them on the smooth roads, thinking that they're doing the right thing.
Mm.
But if you look at a pulse, it goes up and down, doesn't it, to show you're alive. What happens when it flatlines? You're dead. And yet so many of us are trying to create a life that's smooth, and it's actually unattainable. So I wanted to create language that would change that. And the language, so instead of bad emotions, they're rough. And rough has a purpose. And rough is a patch. It doesn't last forever. But if I've made a bad decision, that's bad it's almost punishment bad, that's bad forever, where, I made a rough decision. But that roughness has had a purpose, as we all know. But I say to parents and adults, and children, should you go on the rough roads? And so many people say no. And I said, well, if you want to improve your driving skills, will you do that on a rough or a smooth road? Kids always say smooth. And I say, well, actually smooth, I'm not increasing my driving skills. It's the rough roads that I am. And this is where, because we're not leaving people on the rough roads, not for the big things, this is for the everyday things, because these are the things that fill up your glass and make it so heavy that you can't continue. So it's the big thing, because we've done a lot of stuff with the big things, but it's these small ones that accumulate every day. Like I talk to people and say, these bully-free zones, it's never going to happen. We do great things with the big things, but, someone's always going to turn their back on you or exclude you from a conversation, no matter how old you are. And we need to teach people how to respond to that, not to say, oh, I'm being bullied, and someone else comes and takes their steering wheel and fixes it for them. Then no one is getting the skills to be able to regain and maintain control no matter what road they're on. So at the moment, when people are being left on the rough road by themselves and they get out of control, they crash. We've got that from little kids right to adolescents to CEOs to, everyone. And, it's the little things, like I've got nothing to do, I'll give you something to do. You're upset, I'll take you to coffee. We're constantly, I'll give you some flowers. I'm not saying don't do any of those things, but sometimes you need to stand back and say, look, I'm there, but how would you, what's something that you could think of to do? And giving them the ability to recognize what takes them out of control and then how to then regain and maintain control. So and this is where EQ comes in, because you have to be self-aware of what road am I on? Am I in control or out of control? And you observe others. What road are they on? Are they in or out of control? And it's teaching people what I actually call the things that take you out of control. I call them TEPs. And that's take emotional, it triggers extra precaution. Because it often sends you on a rough road and can take you out of control on either road, because you can be out of control on that smooth road as well. Overconfidence, overexcited, party drugs, alcohol, all of those things take you out of control. But it's understanding what your TEPs are that take you out of control. And I use a hand signal for that, which is you put your hand up like a stop sign and bend your thumb in. And the thumb is your amygdala. And your amygdala, as we all know, is your fight, flight. It's your reactive brain. And then when you regain control, you bring your fingers down over your thumb. Your fingernails are your prefrontal cortex. And that's your thinking, creative brain. So if you're talking to someone who is out of control, they can't access their prefrontal cortex. So there's no point in talking to them in a meeting. And I actually had a CEO, he said he was in the middle of a meeting and they'd all learned this language. And it was getting out of control. So he just did the hand gesture and everyone stopped, no one judged, and he just said, I'm just going outside to do some breathing. Now, he wasn't actually out of control. The rest of the people were. But when he came back in 2 minutes' time, everyone else had regained control because they'd done some breathing as well. And so then they could continue with the meeting. So it's, obviously, pets are the things to get you back into control. So you've got TEPs, TEP, pets, PET. They're the reverse of each other because life is about perspective. And some people say, oh, I'm not going to use those words. And I say, well, you use Google, Snapchat, Twitter. I think pet and TEP, it's often what it stands for. And it's the pets that are really interesting because we're going into dopamine addiction. And that's when a pet turns into a tip. Because dopamine addiction, it's from all the social media, as we know, and also the gaming and too much sugar, too much carbohydrate, too much alcohol. All of those things create a dopamine spike. And what's happening in the brain is the neurons start shaking. Excuse me, it's because dopamine's excitatory and inhibitory. So with the excitatory part of it, it gets excited, then it excites the one next to it and the next to it and next to it until they're all shaking, and then they start to die. And that's when the brain says, we don't want this dopamine overload because we don't want them all to die. So the neuron might have 6 receptors for dopamine. It says, okay, we're cutting it down to 1, which means that you need more sugar, more of your game, more shopping, more scrolling on your social media. And so you up that to get the satisfaction. And then the brain says, this is the frightening part. Look, this is still too much dopamine. I'm actually going to stop the natural creation of dopamine, which means that's why so many people, when they go outside, they can't sit and just look at a wave or do something because their natural dopamine isn't being created. They need to go and play a game or look through their phone or do that sort of thing. And we're talking from 1-year-olds all the way through. So it's being aware of what activities cause dopamine. It doesn't mean stop them. Mm-hmm. And also the activities, the pets, the serotonin ones that will create that zen out feeling within your cells and having that balance. Because at the moment, people's, they've got 6-lane highways in their brain leading to somewhere they don't want to go. You might come home from work and you're super stressed. And so you have a drink or eat something, which is wonderful to begin with, but you end up eating the whole bar of chocolate, drinking the whole bottle of wine or the whole, 6-pack of beer. And then that pet turns into a tep. And even though you don't want to go down that 6-lane highway, it's easy, it's comfortable. Whereas when you start to understand emotional addiction, which I don't know whether you've looked at that, because I had an interesting interview the other day and we were talking about being angry and all those rough emotions. And I said, well, some people can be addicted. Right. And they said, that's a bit of a cop-out. I said, well, when you actually create so if you are angry, the brain creates a chemical which goes into the bloodstream. And once it's in the bloodstream, it goes past all the cells. Now, the cell may only have, to begin with, 1 receptor for that feeling of being angry or feeling worthless or whatever that rough emotion is. But it's going past all the time, and cells don't judge. And they think, I'd better increase my receptors for this. So next time it replicates, it doubles the receptors for anger or worthlessness, and doubles and doubles and doubles until it gets to a stage where that cell is addicted to that particular emotional chemical. And then you might say, okay, I'm going to start a new regime. It could be dieting and exercise or whatever. And you get a few days into it, or a week or 2 weeks, and then you sabotage. And so often you think, I've got no willpower. And immediately you go back into that feeling of worthlessness or the anger, angry emotion, depends on what it is. But it's not willpower. So often it's that biochemical addiction, because your cell is saying, well, hang on, where's that chemical? We've got 6 receptors for here. Where is it? And then the body itself then stimulates the brain to think a worthless thought. so that chemical comes past again. So it's understanding the biochemistry behind addiction to help you get through and create bush bash, basically a new 6-lane highway that's actually going to where you want to go. Sorry, that was a big... You can see I'm very passionate about this.
I love it. I love it.
I'll let you talk now.
I can unpack this in many, many, many ways. Let's go back a little bit towards the beginning of that part of the conversation. And quite often we'll see people who learn to drive in a car park, or it's a designated area that has stop signs and everything. It's kind of made out to be what driving is. And yes, it's okay, like isolation. But then you go put them in the real world and say, okay, cool, you can drive now. Put them out onto the road, and there's so many other things that come into play. And obviously they get very stressed, and they end up having accidents or whatever. They're not used to the rough roads at all.
Absolutely.
We see it a lot. I remember seeing a lot in Asia, where you see a lot of, let's take golf, for example, a lot of the kids over there, because of space and obviously money as well, is they learn to play golf inside a driving range. And then when they go out and go and play in a real competition, there's other stimuli coming along, and mentally they can't cope with it because they're not used to the different things that might happen. Or they're now playing against someone else who might play a good shot. How does that affect you mentally? Those type of things. So I think that's really important to understand, that we do need those rough roads. And I think sometimes as parents too, you think you're doing the best by picking them up and making them feel good. But sometimes you just need to let them figure out how to get themselves back up. Behind me, you can see a chair here. It's a Chesterfield chair. My little daughter kept walking up to it, and you could see she was interested in it, but we'd never put her on it, and she couldn't climb up on it. And then one day I put her on it, and she was like sitting back like she's the queen, and thought it was amazing. And then she went to get off, and it was just a little bit higher than the couch. And so she got part way off, and she kind of was about that far off the bottom, touching the ground.
Yep.
And then she started to kind of talk out, started to speak to us, or, a little bit of cry and that as well. And I just said to Julie, I said, look, just leave her. She'll figure it out.
Well done.
And, in the end, she managed to figure out how to come off the chair. And I think, we need to give them that space at times.
Definitely.
Yeah. Good night. Go ahead. Go.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say definitely. And then that gives them a tool to be able to cope with those sort of things. I can remember one of my kids, he'd wake up in the middle of the night and, have night terrors, and he would be out of control, and he'd run to me, my bed, I'd give him a cuddle and then put him back to bed. And this happened about 3 nights in a row. And I suddenly thought, what happens if I'm not here? What am I teaching him? I'm actually teaching him to come to me, I'm his pet, and so before he went to sleep, we sat down and worked out, well, what could you do when you wake up to be able to calm yourself down? Mm-hmm. And obviously I'm not banned, he's not banned from coming into the parents if things are tough, but it's giving him that. And his was the song, We Will Rock You, because he loves music. And and so I said, well, what are you going to do with it? And he said, I'm going to go and move my body as well. I said, okay. So he went to sleep, and he woke up and was going to come into me, and he didn't. And he went, and I could hear him go, and he thought, that's not working. And that's, and he started moving his body, and all of a sudden it stopped. And I say to kids when I tell them that, what happened? They said, he went to sleep. I said, how do you think he felt? And they said, really good. And I said, exactly. He was able to solve something himself. So it's these little things, not only at home, but at work, the little things that, I can see you're having a problem with that client. How about trying another way of solving this, rather than you coming in and just, this is the way you should solve it. I really liked what you did with that client. Do you think it would work with this one? Have it, or, there's all sorts of things that we can give people a little more responsibility rather than fixing the situation.
And that's where the resilience component comes into play. We've talked about it actually on a couple of podcast episodes recently and they haven't been, at the time of this recording, they haven't been released yet. And I'm curious because you're an expert kind of in this space, but I'd be curious to get your perspective on something we've been talking about. And that is the fact that we see a lot of coaches who come into, and this is more adult coaches and think about life coaching, business coaching sort of space. And they come with this idea that, one, there's always a problem. And so they're trying to coach you on a problem, whereas sometimes we actually don't need coaching on a problem. Sometimes we need to unpack something we do really well to try and understand it. So there's coaching to understand versus coaching to fix a problem. But if we're looking at a problem sometimes, I think sometimes coaches get in the way. And here's the reason why. One, bias can kick in, so you can start to formulate what the solution should be. So then the questions you ask lead them into that direction. But secondly, we take away a key component of resilience, which is problem solving, which you were talking about before, and decision making, and trying to understand that for yourself. And so one of the best coaching calls I have ever done, and best 1 hour coaching call I ever done, lasted 3 minutes, where the person shared the challenge they were facing through. And my response was, interesting. I'm going to let you go now, and I look forward to seeing you again in 1 week's time. And they were like, what, aren't you going to help me? I said, no, you can help yourself. And I said, the best thing I can do to help you is for you to go away for the next week, and I want you to try and figure it out yourself.
Perfect.
And so everyone needs a coach. I believe everyone needs coaches, whether that be formal, informal, to help them get through situations, because we can't do everything on our own. We don't have enough experience and expertise ourselves to always fix something. But as a coach, we need to understand how we coach. And sometimes it's best to say nothing.
Absolutely. I think one of my favorite words is fascinating, with whatever said, which is a bit like interesting. Because, as you say, a lot of people you go for help, they're picking people off the rough road and putting them on the smooth, which is not solving the problem at all. And part of my metaphor is the rear view mirror is small for a reason. If you keep looking back at what you did, then you're going to crash. And that's what so many people do when they're coaching someone. Well, let's go back to the problem and let's see. Sometimes you just need to learn to look out that front windscreen. And it's big for a reason, because that's where we should be going. I mean, it doesn't mean ignore the rear view mirror. It's there to glance at and learn from, but not to focus on.
I think we have a big challenge ahead of us. There's with everything that's amazing, there's always there's potentially always an equal and opposite side to it, right? So if we look at let's look at technology, right? We've had Dr. Google, now we have Miss Chat GPT, or whatever you want to call it, or AI. And rather than going through a process of thinking through something, we are literally going to find another source. It's like the coach asking the questions to try and get you to the realization. And in some ways, Chat GPT, and I actually haven't used it because I haven't needed to.
Yeah.
Because I love solving. I love that process. And yes, it may take longer, and I'm absolutely okay with it. But also, I think I'm going to come up with solutions that are potentially quite different to what I might be given. And so I'm really okay with that. I will use ChatGPT when I need to for some researching aspects. At the moment, don't need it.
Yeah.
But I think we need to be very, very careful. The more that just because we can make a process autonomous, just because we can do something doesn't mean it's actually good for us long term.
Absolutely.
And I think we need to take a little bit more care of what the unintended consequences might be. And I still, everyone keeps talking about, we need to be talking about the critical thinking and decision making and problem solving, putting it in school. And I'm like, we've always needed that. But it's going to become harder and harder because we keep putting all these things in way to reduce the the importance of those things.
Yeah.
But we're going to need it. As the more technology comes in, the greater the human intelligence we're going to need going forward.
But
so it's a fascinating situation we're in.
Look, it is. And I believe it all comes back to responsibility. It's your responsibility on how you think, on how you react, your response to people and circumstance. And starting in 2012, it's been a hard road because people don't want to take responsibility.
Yeah.
It's been fascinating. Even though it was like when I did my Ph.D., I did it with first-year university students. And mine is a language change. So all I did was send them a text every day, 5 days a week for 8 weeks. And they didn't meet me, I didn't meet them, and they knew nothing about what it was, just that they received the text. And the post-test was during exams. So I thought, I'm not going to get anything here. And what was really interesting was the control group virtually didn't change. But the SMS group changed on everything. Their psychological distress levels came down below that of the average uni student. Their well-being, their psychological well-being rose, their life satisfaction, their resilience levels. But what really blew me away is I interviewed 20 of them, and for 3 of them, it actually stopped them suiciding.
Wow. And
that, with the language change and giving them responsibility. Like one of the girls, she said the text that changed everything was, "Are you driving under the influence of someone else's emotion? Remember, you can stop and take control." And there was one boy, his was, if you're on a rough road out of control, it's okay. Just slow down, take a deep breath, and know that no road lasts forever. Now, the whole thing is taking away the judgment of emotions. If you can take away the judgment of bad and good and say, look, actually, I don't care what road you're on, as long as you can regain and maintain control. Like people with anxiety, it's almost now we're saying, you're bad, you're sick, we need to get you off that road and onto the smooth road. So they're feeling as though they need to be fixed, but they're not broken. It's okay, let's see how we can get you in control on that road of anxiety.
Yeah.
And you find once they get in control, then it's much easier for them to go over onto that smooth road. But you don't and who said we have to be glass half full? A lot of people who are glass half empty are the ones that change the world. We're judging all of this. And, there's some people who spend a lot of their time on rough roads and, and they feel as though they're less than when they do that. But if they can learn to regain control, they're doing their advanced driving course. And that's exciting, but, and as I said, I'm talking about the small things in life that happen every day, not the really major traumatic ones where you don't have control of your steering wheel. The person or the incident does, whereas this is, getting people back into control.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And I have mentioned this before to our listeners, but there's certain things, like for me, hard work. You can throw whatever you like at me, hard work, and I'm fine. Absolutely fine. I'll deal with it. Absolutely no issue. Yes, it's challenging in the moments, but I can deal with it. When it becomes unfair, and as you're talking about, some of those things that are out of your control in a way. So the most beautiful time in my life is being a parent, having a young child, but also the most challenging because sleep deprivation. I tell you, training for an Ironman, 30 hours of training, and sometimes we went up to 40 hours of training, plus still working, piece of cake, like absolute piece of cake. But sleep deprivation, where one is you can't control when you wake up or not. Like it's not your thoughts in your head. It is literally something else waking you up. And at times, you're just falling back to sleep, bang, you get woken up. So you're not even getting into the right sleep waves. That there was the first time in my life where I have fully understand how some people can get into a space of depression.
Yeah.
How can even get into burnout? Because as I said, I'd flatlined before, but that was me just going beyond what my body was capable. It had nothing to do with me getting burnout. I didn't have it.
Yeah.
But this time I did. And I noticed what was happening from a neurochemistry point of view, where it shifted. And I've always been a very positive person, but I started to become cynical. I started to become negative. I was observing it, and it was kind of like, tonight I'm going to have a good sleep. Tomorrow I'm going to be fine. And so when it's out of your control, in some ways it's unfair. It's a very different way of approaching, and you need people around you that can recognize it. Because even if you can recognize it, when you're in it, it's very difficult. And so I'm really curious when you've got these situations where it's under your control, right? You might be on those rough roads under control, but when you maybe not be, how do we then cope with it? Can we do it on our own? Because I had someone say, I just use positive psychology. You can't, the brain is doing different things. You literally, in that situation, I was trying, I can tell you, but it wasn't working.
No, it is. It's a real challenge, and it's getting from that amygdala into the prefrontal cortex. And it's I've got some emergency in hospitals, the emergency room. Some of them trialled having the map where I've got rough roads on one side and smooth roads on another.
Yeah.
And when the patient came in who was being very mentally and emotionally challenged, they'd put the map in front and say, which side are you on?
Yeah.
And in that moment of looking at which side I'm on, they got back into their prefrontal cortex just a bit, but they may recognize that they're on that rough road. But as you say, it's then regaining control on that road. And so often, it's understanding what your pets are before anything happens. And people can say breathing and all those sort of things. But when you're actually in that state of being out of control, it often doesn't work. And as you say, if there's something outside, an outside influence that you can't control, it makes it even more difficult. But it's, I suppose, leading up to that, having all sorts of ways of knowing how to bring yourself back into control, remain on that road because you are out of, you are out of your comfort zone. So you're on that rough road. But if you haven't got those pets in place before anything happens, you can't grab them, you can't think of them, you can't do anything because you're in that amygdala stage. So it's doing the work every day on how to bring yourself back into control. It's not having the judgment. Now, fear is false evidence appearing real. It's understanding that, this doesn't last forever. But once it gets to the stage where you can't employ your pets that you already know and they're there and they're not working, then that's when you need to seek help. You need other people there to be able to not pick you up and put you over, but some people need to be able to point out to you different things that you can do because you're not in your prefrontal cortex and able to do that. The stuff that I do deals with the everyday stuff. All the like tips are your alarm clock in the morning. It could be having a shower and seeing your body. It could be thinking about, what am I going to eat today? What am I going to get for the family today? Oh, I've got to get everyone up now. All those, people can face 20 tips before they even, in the first hour of their day. And it's viewing those tips as challenges, not as something that's negative. And that's why I didn't call them triggers. They're challenges. And it's then working out a pet for that relevant or that particular challenge. So, for example, if it's an alarm clock, then putting the snooze button, as you know, isn't a solution at all because if you fall asleep for 10 minutes, then you haven't even, your sleep cycle goes for at least 45. So if you wake up within 10 minutes, it can take your brain 3 to 4 hours to get rid of the fog. And that's why so many people go straight for coffee to try and get that clarity. So it might be the night before, okay, I'm going to cue up this song or this particular podcast. So when the alarm goes, I'm going to start listening to that and get up and have something that you've already designated for that particular thing. And it's learning to, when you come home at night, you know that you could overdo a certain thing. So it's only having that first row of chocolate, and it's understanding that if you do exceed that, it becomes a tip. And then you have to take responsibility for that. It's no one else's fault. And it's okay. It's just the way, it's not judging that. You just think, okay, I need to put in place something stronger. I know I'm someone, if I have one piece of chocolate, I'll eat the whole block. So my solution is I don't eat chocolate because I'm an all or nothing. And that works for me. But for other people, it doesn't work. But yeah, you have your pets, you try them, and if they don't work, that's when things are serious and you need just an outside influence just to guide you, not to do it for you, but to say, it's okay, you're on a rough road at the moment, a bit out of control. And let's see if we can sit down and put in a plan on your map that will make it, easier for you to cope with it. You may not change because it's all how you respond. So you can't change people and circumstances or your little baby crying, but you've got to change how you respond to it.
And mine was I literally had to pull the car off to the side of the road, so to speak, and take a nap. So the only way for me to get out of that was I had to selfishly go, take a trip to Melbourne to a friend's place where I got 10 hours sleep a night for 4 nights, which got me back to a space where I could at least function normally through to the end of the year. That was the only way at that point.
Absolutely.
That helped me. And so when do you need to pull over and either step out of the car or take a rest in the car, depending on what's happening? And that getting out of the car might be to get someone else to be there with you to, whether that, whoever you might need in that challenge, right? It could be a specialist, it could
Absolutely.
be a friend, it could be a partner, whatever it may be. But as you say, you're talking about those moments, more of an everyday type thing. What are those strategies, etc.? Will you have control over? I'm like you too. I can't just have one piece of chocolate. I will have the whole block. But interesting though, Ashley, I'm thinking about this, right? When I'm at home, I'm working from home, I will constantly find myself at the fridge or at the pantry way too often.
Yeah.
But if I go out working somewhere else, I will quite comfortably just eat 2 meals a day. It's really interesting, the environment you're in. And so there's a question there too, is how much of an effect does an environment have in regards to patterns that may show up?
A huge effect. Because I know the last 3 days I do a water fast for 3 days, and I just have salt with it. And I've been writing a whole lot of articles, and I find I'm exactly the same. If I'm really concentrating and working hard, I need those breaks to go to the fridge. And this weekend I couldn't because I was having water, and I thought, how interesting. So what I did is I substituted each time I wanted to. I would either heat the water, have it with ice, or have it just room temperature. So I found I needed that stimulation of something a bit different, but I had to change how I responded to it. Oh, I'm not eating food. I can't do that. I had to change. Wow, I'm going to have hot water this time. That's cool. I'm going. So it's being in charge of that response. That's so important. But yes, environment does play a huge role. And it's being aware of that. It's that awareness, and how can I regain control in that environment?
I'm gonna take a step back here to the question you asked when you were doing your research, and that was around, I think it was something like, how do you respond to someone else's emotional or you're under the, I don't know, are you under
Are
the
you
influence,
driving under the influence of someone else's
emotions?
Yes.
And I thought that was fascinating. Like, that question, I think, is just alone is a profound question to ask anyone at any point. Alone. What other types of questions were you asking?
So these were the texts.
Or the text here, sorry, the text that you were sharing with them.
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's thousands of them. It was all about, the whole reason was to make them stop and think, and to understand, like, for example, are you finding yourself looking out the rear vision mirror all the time? Remember, we all feel shame and guilt. You know, they say we grow from those. But if you maintain looking out the back, you are going to crash. What is something that you can focus on out of your windscreen now? And those sort of things. I'm paraphrasing because they're much more succinct than that. But basically, the whole premise is it's your steering wheel. You're in charge. One of them was, if you have a friend who is on a rough road at the moment, resist the temptation to lift them off. Let them know you're there, but allow them the moment to be able to regain and maintain control of their steering wheel.
Yeah.
Because so often we pick other people up. So it's about, and it was all about being able to recognize how we all have different tips. Do you think you're someone's tip? And they go, and because we all are, you know, we're not everyone's pet. You know, there's times when one of them was, if someone walks past you in the corridor and ignores you, how do you respond? And there was one year 10 girl, and she said, oh, that happened to me. There was a friend of mine, and she came past me, and she just totally ignored me. And I thought, oh, what have I done? Was it something I said? And she said, I suddenly started to create this whole scenario. I know what it is. It's that new person who's just come to school. She's turned her against me. And she suddenly thought, hang on, she ignored me. No, she didn't. She just didn't look at me. I wonder what's going on in her life that she didn't even see me. Yeah. What was her tip? And after the class, she asked her, and she said, are you okay? And she burst into tears and said, no, I had the worst fight with Mum in the car this morning. Now, we are doing that for everything. You know, we bring about these stories if something happens, and we say, oh, they're not replying to my text because of, you know, and we create these incredible scenarios in our head that are totally false. And it can ruin relationships on something that doesn't even exist. So it's trying to teach people to take control of what road they're on. Why am I going on this rough road just because I think she didn't see me? And it's understanding, like I have schools now where if someone is rude or mean or says something, the kids automatically recognize they're the ones on the rough road, not them. And they don't have to join them. Whereas at the moment, someone comes into the office and they're in a foul mood or whatever, often the whole team can end up being on a rough road.
Yeah.
But it's understanding we all have tips. You don't just go on a rough road. There's a tip behind that. And it's having that empathy and humanity. Like there was a taxi driver. He was a driver. He was in very congested traffic. And it started moving. And when it started moving, the guy in front of him suddenly tried to do a U-turn. So completely blocked both lanes again. And he said normally he'd just put his hand on the horn, give him the finger, open the window, shout at him. And he he said he stopped and he thought, I wonder what the tep is that's causing him to do the U-turn. He could have just got a phone call saying, your kid's in hospital. This is what we don't do. We just totally jump to a conclusion that isn't even there.
It reminds me of a few days ago, actually. I was just coming out of the gym, and where I go to the gym, there's a straight road down, but there's a little roundabout in it. There's a car park on one side. Actually, car parks on both sides. One is for a medical practice, and one is just a normal car park for the gym kind of area. And at that time of day, it's early morning, no one ever comes out of the medical. I've never ever had a car come from that side, right? And I've got a car that has autonomous, some aspects of autonomous vehicle. So you'll get beeps if there's something coming from the side. I just finished a yoga session. I come out, I was driving down, I saw someone on the left-hand side and, just went through that roundabout like I normally would. And as I was going through it, this car came up really fast beside me and then stopped. And I just kept going through because there's no point stopping. We didn't hit each other, and I kept going through. And then, boy, the look I got at the traffic light just up the road, and the words I could see coming from that mouth. And I'm sitting there going, this person's interpreting something in a completely different way to maybe what just happened. And so we always do it. For me, I literally was used to a pattern of this is what happens. And for whatever reason, I'm a very aware person, did not see that. And so it was really out of the ordinary for me. And obviously I'm in a bit of a state of shock as I'm driving down, and I kind of get to the thing and I'm like, I wonder how that person's feeling. And then I see the reaction. I'm like, that person's really mad right now.
Yeah.
Thinks I'm an absolute a-hole. And how rude am I? Type thing where I literally just didn't see that person. It just didn't come. And so that person probably thinks I'm a real jerk right now.
And as you say, it happens all the time. Yesterday morning in the car park, because it's so hot here, and I paddle every morning. I've got a wave ski, and I was just going back to my car, and people are circling in the car park. And there was a guy, and I could see all his friends had parked and he hadn't, and they were going scuba diving. And I said to him, I'm just going on the car at the end. Well, by the time he got to the end, another car came round and said, are you going? And I said, yes, but that guy is going, you cannot save car parks, you can't. And she just went off. She was like a cracker. And I said, look, I'm really sorry. I know it must seem like that. He was actually here before you. No, I was here before you. And this guy was, in the end, she drove off in an absolute huff. But I don't know what had happened to her that morning.
No.
She could have had kids screaming and all the time, and she was just at the end of her tether. So it's having that compassion in those moments. The people who are serving coffee, they're rude. Well, you don't know why. It's that understanding the reasons behind certain emotions and giving them the benefit of the doubt for these little things, because those things, like the guy who was really cross with you and there's a woman who was cross with me, that's filling their glass. And as we say, if you've got a glass of water, it's not heavy. But if you hold it for 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, 20 years, 30 years, I've just been dealing with some farmers who, in their community, there's quite a few who've suicided.
Yeah.
And they've looked into their lives and said, well, their life's better than mine. But it's not that. It's how long they've had to hold that glass without knowing how to empty it. And that's why this is all about prevention. And as I was saying to you before, it's about the salutogenic perspective rather than the pathogenic perspective. Because if you've got a continuum of health and illness, pathogenic is down one end and salutogenic is down the other. So if you take a stress and put it in the middle and you bring it down, what everyone's doing is taking that stress down to the pathogenic level, saying this stress is going to cause illness, so we need to do this and this. Whereas my perspective as prevention, you take the stress and you take it up the salutogenic end. How can I build health out of this? And and that's where the power is, when it is still manageable and not where Although you did the perfect thing, you did find a pet, which was to actually have sleep. And that is not selfish. It's called self-management.
Mm-hmm.
And you went down and, took it into your own hands. And 4 days later, you were a much better person to be within yourself and also in your situation.
Yeah,
so it's
hugely.
not, yeah.
Hugely, because if I hadn't have done that too, the perceptions of other people may have, as you said, they can take it out of context so easily. We sweat the small stuff way too much.
We do.
Rather than just letting it go. And it just made me think of something there too, kind of just, it was a trigger, a little trigger, a good trigger, a really good trigger of thought. And that was around, we're seeing a lot of companies move to, obviously we've got the challenges of hybrid type working spaces or remote working. And then we're also seeing companies who are reducing to 4-day weeks so that people can have their own time, own social time, more of their own social time in a way, and personal time. And we've also seen the reduction in kind of work get-togethers in a way, so to speak. So many companies and even industries, like the Friday lunchtime, we kind of knew we were only working 4.5 days a week anyway, because you kind of get to lunchtime and everyone kind of knock off, go to a lunch, which ended up being a few drinks and etc. But that was where a lot of people were able to discuss things a lot more freely, be able to get things off their chest and it not build up over a period of time. And so, yes, we might be fixing one thing, but I'm also wondering, what are we doing to find that release when you're working in group situations of, if we're condensing the time we are together, if we're reducing the size of the meetings, if we're removing those times where we kind of takes us out of that normal space to allow discussions to happen, are we missing something here? And so I'm curious to see that those companies that make these changes in the way that they work, are they considering these other factors that may not be productive in a certain sense or high performing in a certain sense, but how is that actually affecting the culture and the relationships long term?
Hugely. Yeah, hugely. No, you're spot on, because so much of the real work goes on in a casual manner. It's not, and it's in a camaraderie, environment where you're all helping each other. So, and this is where the EQ is coming up, where leaders are starting to understand that side of the social animal of who we are is just as important, because what's happening is people are burning out, and yes, they might work 3 days a week, but they really don't know how to conduct the 4 days of their week in a productive way, other than going on gaming or doing all sorts of things that is a dopamine addiction. So the time off isn't helping either, because a lot of people are lost in that time off. And it's accentuating feelings that, it's interesting. One thing I've come across a lot is, when did we stop? Well, when do we make sad an illness and not an emotion that should be experienced?
Very good.
Depression, totally different. That is an illness and that's serious. But we've got parents whose kids are sad. Oh no, they're getting depressed.
Yeah.
And so people aren't even being allowed to feel sad. So a lot of people, when they are going through something, and it could be grief or, about the change in job or about their personal life, no one's taught them how to cope when they actually are sad. You're not failing if you're sad. There was one family whose child died, and, which was absolutely tragic. But having the rough and smooth emotions allowed them to understand it's okay if we're on the rough road. This is a really huge thing. We need to go to the smooth road sometimes. But it not only gave them a conversation within their family, it was the families around them could say, well, of course you're on a rough road. Not, how are you? Oh yeah, I'm coping. It's, because there's no judgment, they could say, look, we're on a pretty rough road at the moment. Sometimes we're out of control, but we're getting better. And it's also giving the kids, the friends of that child that died. Of course you're on a rough road at the moment and you're sad, but it's been turning into depression and you need to, pill for this or whatever, rather than really understanding the value of these emotions. Like, there's no one out there who doesn't feel ashamed of something they've done or said.
Yeah.
It's part of our growing. Of course we'll be ashamed or feel guilty about something that we've done. And it's understanding, well, that was rough. That wasn't bad. It was rough. And I can learn from that. It's taking away that judgment, but also having people understand the responsibility, and their language change is really important here, of not saying, you make me. So if I say to you, you're making me really angry, who has the steering wheel? Who has control? You do. And we've got people who it's your fault, you're making me, it's the government's fault, it's COVID's fault. As soon as you do that, you're actually giving your steering wheel to that situation or that person, and you're left on the rough road with no means of control. And to get back control, you retaliate. And this is what we're doing, not only from a personal level, but also a country level. You bomb me, so I'm going to bomb you. You stole my land, I'll steal yours. You said this to me, so I'm going to say this to you. We're doing it everywhere. And this is why even the shootings in America, which, they are every day in schools. And the kids are naming it up. I'm shooting you because you didn't invite me to the prom. I'm shooting you, the teacher, because you didn't give me an A. Because we're in this world of blame. My boss is making me angry. No, I am choosing to be angry because that was unfair. And as soon as you substitute you make me or it's your fault with I'm choosing to feel this way, you'll find as a parent, if you can say I am choosing to be angry, it's totally different than why did you do that? It's the same with it was interesting. I was with a group of kids the other day, and one of them was playing with a car. I was going all the time in front of me. I looked at it and I said, that's a bit of a tip for me. And he said, no worries, put it in his pocket, because there was no judgment there.
Yeah.
That's my tip. Oh, okay, well, I'll change that. And it's the same with as soon as you can say, I am choosing to feel this way, you're in control. And that's powerful.
Mm.
So you see, I get very passionate about these things.
We could keep going on, but we are coming to the end of the show, and so I've got a couple of questions for you. We all know smart people have great answers, but the most successful people ask great questions. When was the last time you did something for the first time?
Well, probably as you know, with a business, you're constantly doing things for the first time. But I think something profound that happened to me on Saturday was, because, when you wave ski, you're just usually close to shore. Well, it was on Saturday morning in Melbourne, there wasn't a breath of wind and it was glass. And for the first time, I paddled right out into the middle of the bay. It took me a couple of hours. I was away from everyone except the shipping lane. I had to be careful. But I felt as though I put myself in a vulnerable position, but gained incredible strength from the awareness of being out there.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really thought, I was just paddling out there. But when I got there and stopped and just thought, I'm really vulnerable out here.
Mm.
And, but it was the control that I did have that became really powerful.
I like that. I really like that. What is the one question that you would love to solve?
How for people, how can people, I would like people to take responsibility. So how can we get people to be responsible for how they respond to people and circumstance?
Great question. For you, what is an inspiring great leader, and who is a great example of this for you?
Okay, I think leaders need to allow themselves to be vulnerable, but selectively vulnerable. Biggest thing, they need to listen, because listening is a quality that seems to have gone out the window. A lot of leaders will come in with the solution. And I know Nelson Mandela said his dad, who was a leader, would sit back and hear everyone talk first, and then he would talk. Whereas if he'd talked first, no one else would have contributed. And I think one of a leader who first had an impression on me was Mother Teresa. I mean, it sounds, but it was her use of language, because that's what I love, and that's what I do, changing good and bad to rough and smooth changes everything. Well, with her, she said, I do not walk against war. I walk for peace. And I can remember when she said that, I thought, wow, it made me realize how important words are and how we can change everything by our whole perspective by changing the words that we use.
Yes, the power of language. It's been a fascinating conversation. How can people learn more about what you do, and what is the best way for people to connect with you?
Okay, probably my website, which is emotionalresiliencetraining.com.au. And that's it. They can email me from there, do anything from there. Anyone who's interested in learning more, because there's a lot of resources, but I would recommend the audio course because it's just 7 small lessons, just to get that language into your brain and to change, to have that control over how you respond to people and circumstance, which is incredibly powerful.
Excellent. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today, Jane. From talking about, the emotional intelligence to resilience and how you bring those together from emotional resilience point of view, thinking about the way we change the language that we use and the power that can have, to thinking about the analogies or the metaphor that you use in regards to driving a car, and do you have your hands on the steering wheel and you have control of that, to the questions that you asked during your research. And I really like the one around, how are you being influenced by the emotions of someone else? And I think that's such an important thing. It can either be the emotions of someone else or our perceptions of someone else's emotions or thinking.
Well said.
And we are, it really brings through how complicated we are as human beings, but how easily we can simplify our life as well if we choose to take control of it and put our hands on the steering wheel, so to speak. So thank you very much for your time today. As I said, I can continue this conversation for hours on end, and hopefully one day I get that chance to. Maybe we'll go out for a paddle one day when I'm in Melbourne.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, you're welcome. So thank you very much. Have a beautiful day, and appreciate your contribution to the show.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's time for you to join the Inspiring Great Leaders movement by visiting craigjohns.com.au. Share this podcast on LinkedIn and be sure to hashtag Inspiring Great Leaders. We would love it if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Drop us a line with your feedback and questions, and connect with us on the Craig Johns LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram pages. Be sure to check out the next Inspiring Great Leaders podcast, where the ordinary don't belong.